The title of his talk is The Future of Advertising is the Brain, Why Branded Content Success Will Be Driven by Neuroscience. Thanks very much, Kevin.
Thanks. Cool. That was a great intro to what I'll be talking about, which is going to be, neurobiometrics, the subconscious mind, and how we need to be using this in order to understand how to go forward with advertising. I'll just kind of run through, today's agenda, what I want to talk about. This is an industry in peril. Advertising is kind of going through a little bit of an existential crisis right now. It's sort of trying to find out exactly what it's going to be. And the savior throughout this, and obviously I'll explain kind of how I came to this, is branded content, brand integration, things like that. But the savior has an Achilles heel, and that Achilles heel is measurement, and that's where neuroscience and associated kind of biometric measurement will come in. So in terms of an industry in peril, if anybody's been paying any lick of attention to trade press and beyond, you'll know that people don't really like ads at all. In fact, there was a Page Fair study released recently that 419 million people have installed mobile ad blockers. 84% of people want to fast forward through TV commercials, and 81% of people are muting online video as it comes up and kind of interrupts our desire to consume content. All this kind of spells like a pretty gloomy picture for both the advertisers that need to connect with consumers and the content owners who are trying to connect with consumers and of course monetize their media. Just a smattering of headlines that kind of spell out this space. Invasion of ad blockers. It's kind of meant to be like sort of in your face, because again, you had to be living under a rock to realize or to not know that this is a pervasive problem. And of course, if you search ad blocking, you'll get a how-to, right? So there are loads of people that are only too willing to help you install an ad blocking type software onto your phone or your browser or whatever so that you can remove those nuisances. The only thing that matches that kind of intensity in terms of ad blocking and the headlines, as far as I can see, is branded content. So over the last little while, the upfronts just happened recently. In Canada, they're kind of still going. A lot of these companies, Viceland, Turner, Facebook, et cetera, are launching kind of content studios, branded content execution, that kind of thing, integrating more and more of advertiser and commercial content into their publisher content. Branded content is sort of this nebulous type of trend, I guess you could say. But BCG has a pretty reasonable definition. Content that carries a consumer benefit, serves the brand, and is presented in an environment that consumers find authentic. It's actually not a new concept, okay? I was corrected recently. I wrote a blog post on the Brainsights blog and corrected recently. I attributed the first branded content product placement thing to be in 1927 in the film Wings, where a Hershey's bar actually showed up in this film, this black and white film. And I was corrected by a historian at York University who was studying society in London in the 1860s. If there's any champagne fans in the room, and I know that there are because I was out last night with some of you guys. This is a really fascinating story about how Moet and Chandon and Veuve Clicquot went head-to-head in the music halls of 1860s London, sponsoring the music hall stars, which would have been like the kind of 1860s London equivalent of like Drake and Beyonce, basically, sponsoring these guys to sing about the virtues of champagne. And this is a small little excerpt. Clicquot, Clicquot, that's the wine for me. It's the wine for me too. And that's, one of the, I suppose, earliest editions or earliest instances of branded content. And again, if anybody watches John Oliver in Last Week Tonight, native he basically went to town on native advertising recently, and it kind of floated around the ad industry as a bit of a pain point. But it is all the rage, and you know that it's all the rage because it gets on John Oliver. It's projected to grow as well to $25 billion by 2019. This, again, because of the definition of branded content, it's like you don't actually quite know how it's defined and where it begins and where it ends. This is from BCG saying that it's going to grow from 10 billion to 25 billion. I've also read that it's going to grow to 300 billion, which is obviously a very different number than 25 billion. But the point here is that because of this ad avoidance and ad saturation that people are trying to avoid, branded content is going to grow. There's another trend, obviously, around like self-publishing platforms that have been kind of, on the rise lately as well. And more and more advertisers are kind of turning into publishers and looking to kind of like change up their focus from campaigns into more of publishing platforms. And if anybody follows Seth Godin, content marketing is the only marketing left. But what is branded content? How do you best execute that? Again, from BCG, the best branded content has always provided value to brand, publisher, and consumer, typically by demonstrating that the creator and the deliverer of the content, sometimes one and the same, and sometimes not, understand the user's needs and want to address them. But execution is another matter, right? So you can be authentically integrated within a publisher content. If I'm an advertiser, or if I'm an advertiser, I can authentically deliver published content of value. Either it's entertaining, useful, and meaningful to a user, or you could do like the Wayne's World parody where you just have a Pepsi in the face, or kind of meaningless integration in terms of the greatest movie ever sold, if anybody's seen that. Basically, there's kind of a fine line, and there is for good reason. And that good reason is if I'm a publisher and I want to earn money by capitalizing on my content, I need to go to advertisers and kind of sell them on this type of concept. But if I'm an advertiser and I'm going to be integrating into publisher content, I want to know that it's going to connect with viewers, right? How do I know that? And that's the savior's Achilles heel, is that there's a measurement issue here, right? So the focus groups and the surveys and that kind of thing are not going to get at that type of response, right? Much to the gentleman's point a little bit earlier. So let's look at Amazing Race for a second, all right? We're going to look at static shots of a Nokia phone and interactive shots of a Nokia phone, okay? And basically what Brainsights did was we mined people's brain activity as they were consuming this content. We were using EEG, we use implicit association testing, we use eye tracking as well to understand how people are processing this content when it's on screen. So gratuitous static shots, and anybody who's watched Amazing Race or watched even some of the kind of superhero movies that are coming out of Hollywood right now, you'll see like just gross gratuitous shots of products and brands and that kind of thing. But actually what we observe is when that's on screen, and this matches a lot of the other research that we've done kind of beyond the Amazing Race, you're driving audience tune out. People don't give a shit, right? They see that and they're just like, okay, like I'm just being sold to, right? Integrate that product, i.e. use it within the context of the actual show or the published content or whatever. Make it meaningful, make it useful, communicate to people that it's there for a reason, and you'll see significant lifts. And this wasn't even a really good example of this. But you'll see attention and encoding go up. And those are the three things that we're measuring here: attention, emotional connection, and encoding to memory, the kind of holy trinity of what advertisers need to do in order to ensure that their message is getting across. Are people dialed into what's on screen? Are they emotionally bonding with that content? And are they encoding that to memory? Why does this matter? Advertisers want to connect with consumers, right? But they need proof of that connection. Like if there's kind of two rules that I always sort of live by, is that one, people want to do cool shit, and two, everybody has to report to somebody else, right? So everybody has to prove that this is happening. But more fundamentally, I think, there's a learning that needs to happen for people to be able to execute by platform, right? Branded content is still kind of new. It's not like I can just develop my 30-second spot and place it in programs X, Y, and Z. It's a little newer than that. So understanding and demystifying that is something that measurement can do, and it can power the industry forward that way. Publishers need to maintain and grow audiences, not alienate them. And they need that ad money, right? So if I'm a big advertiser, and I'm thinking about, do I put my ad dollars here or elsewhere? One thing that big publishers are looking at doing, obviously, is integrating that commercial content into publisher content. They need to prove that actually exists, or that actually has an impact, rather. And they have to do that. And for publishers, they can't alienate consumers because consumers have an infinite amount of choice in terms of content right now. Right? They can just go to their Facebook feed, for example, or Instagram feed, or whatever it happens to be. So competition for attention is incredibly fierce. So these are the risks, and they won't be solved by standard measurement methods. And this is where neuro comes in. Okay, so if you recall, think about the kind of second-by-second chart that I showed you earlier on with respect to static product shots versus interactive product shots. And basically what you were seeing there was an aggregated second-by-second look at how the audience's brains are responding to that content and to the placement of product within that content. So neuroscience is being deployed by large advertisers right now in order to execute branded content effectively. Okay, so I'm going to share kind of two cases, one of which is kind of publicly available with Coors Light and their fantasy football integration, and the second one is RBC. I can't disclose the specifics about the lift, but suffice to say it was double-digit across all their brand consideration metrics. So let's just go a little bit deeper into what was happening. So Coors Light was doing these branded vignettes, okay? This series of 12 spots that were kind of done with TSN, which is like the ESPN of Canada. And basically the 12 kind of branded content vignette spots were made to live on TV and other kind of video platforms. Coors Light was pretty nervous about this type of execution, right? They were unsure about this. It had kind of been sold into them by the agency and by TSN. And so this was their first kind of foray into full-blown integration and kind of branded content, right? So they were a little bit nervous. Responding to those nerves, Coors Light were very interested in getting as much brand on screen as possible, okay? Whereas TSN, the publisher, they were like, okay, but that's not really how you should be thinking about this. You should be thinking about this a little more authentically, right? You want to be integrating authentically. And if we're just putting the brand everywhere, it's effectively as good as a spot, and you're probably going to get people tuning out, and you're probably going to get people, fast forwarding through and what have you. So that's where we were kind of called in to help out, right? So we looked at the first 5 of these spots that were created by TSN. And actually what we observed, again by using this biometric and neuroscientific methods, what we observed was that the spots that performed the best, the vignettes that performed the best, also performed the best when the brand elements were on screen. So what does that mean? It means hang tight, Coors Light, dial it back, and let TSN do their thing, integrate the brand meaningfully within these branded vignettes, and execute that way. And then we looked at these branded vignettes and how they actually performed against brand cell spots in general, and the performance of the branded content versus the brand cell spots were night and day. The branded content spots outperformed them all. Why? Because people want to consume content that way, right? They don't want to be sold to. We have very finely tuned bullshit detectors. So what we're observing is that branded content integration, the authentic stuff, is working a lot better. Now consider RBC, Royal Bank of Canada. It's Canada's biggest bank. They were doing something quite daring, actually, in developing a branded content web series. This is something that they had done, for the first time. Very, very nervous about it as well, but were sold in by a branded content agency. They weren't revealing their brand until the 12th episode, and this was a 20-part web series. So again, quite risky, right? But it was a good thing that they had neuroscience helping them out with this, because actually if they didn't, the audience, their target audience, would have dropped off basically after the opening sequence of the first episode. Would never have made it through the entire first episode, much less the 12th one. The results were almost as impressive as the Coors Light ones. Double-digit increases in terms of consideration metrics for the brand, which was their objective for this. The point with all this is that without neuroscience, these brands would never have invested in this branded content. It's just, they were way too nervous. They didn't really know how it was all going to perform. They didn't know kind of how to execute on this new paradigm. But by providing that kind of granularity and understanding how the audience is responding at that non-conscious level, at that emotional level, it was possible for us to develop content to satisfy the brand's needs, the publisher's needs, and most importantly, the consumer needs. And that's why the future of advertising, I believe, is driven by neuroscience.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Kevin. So, we have time for a few questions.
Yep.
Charlie, down at the front.
Real quick. So you're talking about having neuroscience influencing the advertising, and they wouldn't have invested. Is that investment prior to say we're going to do a web series, or prior to saying I'm going to spend the money to put this web series that I developed onto the air?
Yeah, it's actually a bit of both. So with respect to the Coors Light example, we did a huge kind of neuro analysis that looked at Coors Light's target consumer and what kind of tone that they actually preferred when they were being communicated to. Coors Light's a funny brand, so there was a couple different ways that they could go to market with in terms of ridiculous humor, like an Old Spice, or like a situational comedy, like a Seinfeld. And actually, one of the as part of that study, we were looking at specific like ESPN, this is Sports Center spots. And what we realized was that those ones and that kind of tone landed really, really well with that audience. And so we briefed TSN in when they were building those spots. This is the type of tone that you want to go to market with. When the first 5 spots or the first 5 branded vignettes were created, the advertiser Coors Light was very nervous because they didn't see a lot of their branding, right? And of course, like in the absence of any kind of meaningful measurement technique, the best that they could go for was like, I want my brand on screen more, right? Like I want it to be more blatant. Like I want it to be like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of get nervous around that because again, you're putting dollars behind that, right? So they want to make sure that whatever they're putting dollars behind, and however they're playing the story out in the next 7 vignettes, because it was a 12 vignette series, is going to have that impact, right? So it was kind of like a almost like all the way through we were part of that engagement, kind of providing them with like how to talk to this audience to begin with, and then how do you evolve that storyline and how do you sort of like relieve the tension between publisher and advertiser to be able to execute this effectively and drive market share.
Any other questions?
What do you think is your most effective tool that you use for this learning?
EEG. And that's for us, right? Like, and the reason why I say that is because, you know, we've purpose-built a platform that allows for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people to have their brain scan as they're watching content, right? So that kind of like adds to the robustness of the results, the sample size, and that kind of thing. But you know, there's different kind of biometrics that provide different levels of insights, and I would just encourage those people in the room who haven't tried like this type of method to just go explore a little bit. You know, figure out exactly like what's going to be most relevant for you. If you want to look at scale and that kind of thing, like, you know, facial coding, EEG might be a better option, obviously, than like an fMRI, right? And you know, to the gentleman's point before, do your research, right? Like, you know, don't be convinced that just because you have a picture of a brain that's any more powerful, and be aware of that bias. I mean, that's basically what we would be educating our clients on how to do on how to do things, on what to do anyway, is to eliminate bias.
Okay, Kevin, thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Thanks again.